The bridge of the Indomitables screamed in a language of dying electronics and buckled plating. Red emergency lighting washed over the command deck, turning the sweat on Jax's brow into droplets of liquid ruby. He didn't look like the man Alara had married 6 months ago, the quiet, plain soldier who faded into the gold-leafed walls of the glimmering spire. Right now, he looked like a god of momentum. His hands were locked on the manual override, his frame absorbing the shuddering violence of the ship's final burn. Alara gripped the edge of the tactical console, her knuckles white, her breath hitching as the massive organic bulk of the Vrak's hive core filled the entire view screen. The price of peace was a flagship turned into a kinetic bullet. In the thundering heat of the bridge, she finally saw the man behind the mask of the dutiful pawn. Truth is, the marriage had been a funeral for Alara's agency. She remembered the day clearly. The air in the spire had been thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the drone of ancient, meaningless vows. Jax Thorne had stood there in a dress uniform that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders, his face a map of stillness. He was a political necessity, a scrap of meat thrown to the outer rim to keep the border worlds from rioting. The Sovereignty's high command had laughed at him behind crystal flutes of champagne, calling him a dull blade. Alara had spent their wedding night staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the city, wondering how a man could be so entirely unremarkable. But the Vraks didn't care about unremarkable men or high-born princesses. When the hives crossed the frontier, they didn't arrive with the pomp of a conqueror. They arrived like a rot. The Sovereignty's admirals met them with standard tactical doctrine long-range volleys, rigid formations, and the arrogance of 1,000 years of dominance. It was a disaster. The Vraks ignored the rules. They didn't retreat when their flanks were turned. They simply split into 1,000,000 smaller hungers and ate their way through the hull plating of the forward scouts. Sectors that had been secure for centuries went dark in a matter of hours. Ironically, the breakthrough didn't happen in the Grand Strategy Chamber. It happened in a small, cramped briefing room where the High Command had gathered to argue about who to blame for the loss of the 7th Fleet. Jax had been standing by the door as usual, a silent shadow in his plain gray fatigues. He'd been watching the sensor feeds of the Vrak's movements, not as a soldier watching a fleet, but as a predator watching a rival. They aren't vermin, they are the galaxy's endgame, Jax had said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the frantic shouting of the generals like a cold blade. He stepped toward the holographic display, his movements sudden and certain. He pointed to the way the hive ships pulsed in a specific, uneven frequency. They don't have a chain of command, they have a collective nervous system. You're trying to outmaneuver a mind that thinks in light-speed instinct. You don't fight a mind like that. You break the skull. Alara had watched him then, feeling a strange, sharp electric pull in her chest. For the first time, the plain soldier looked dangerous. He didn't come for glory. He came to find something worth the scars. And as the Vraks closed in on the spire itself, the Sovereignty realized they were led by men who knew everything about tradition and nothing about survival. The bridge was a furnace. "Give me the proxy," Jax said, his eyes never leaving the sensor ghosts of the hive core. In the Sovereignty, the command proxy was a relic of a bloodier age, a legal transfer of total soul and body authority from a royal to a commoner in times of existential threat. It hadn't been invoked in 3 centuries. Yalara didn't hesitate. She stepped through the shower of sparks from a failing overhead conduit and pressed her palm against the command shackle on Jax's wrist. "By the blood of the spire," she whispered, her voice steady even as the floor bucked beneath them, "I am yours. The ship is yours." The transfer hummed through the deck plates. Jax didn't thank her. He didn't have time. He simply slammed the thrust levers forward into the emergency overburn. The Indomitable didn't just move, it screamed. The structural integrity fields failed instantly, the screech of protesting metal filling the cabin as the ship began to peel apart like fruit under the sheer G-force. Jax reached out with one hand, catching Alara's arm and pulling her into the recessed safety of the command throne. He shielded her with his own body, his weight a heavy, grounding heat against the cold terror of the vacuum breach alarms. The impact was not a sound. It was an erasure of sound. When the Indomitable pierced the hive core, the world became a white-hot vibration that rattled Alara's teeth in her skull. The Vrak's collective mind didn't just die, it shattered. She felt the psychic backlash like a physical blow, a million alien voices wailing in unison before winking out into nothingness. Then there was only the cold. When Alara finally pushed a piece of jagged bulkhead off her legs, the silence was absolute. The remains of the bridge lay scattered across an asteroid-sized chunk of the hive core's inner sanctum. The stars were visible through a massive tear in the hull, indifferent and bright. She found Jax 10 meters away, buried under a heap of smoldering insulation and broken glass. His breathing was a wet, ragged rasp. His uniform, once so plain and ill-fitting, was shredded and soaked in a dark, thick slick. She knelt beside him, her fingers trembling as she brushed the dust from his cracked visor. He opened his eyes, gray, sharp, and entirely present. "Did we?" he started, coughing as a thin trail of blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. "We broke the skull, Jax," she said, her voice breaking. She took his hand, her skin stained by the cost of his victory. In the weeks that followed, the sovereignty would try to turn it into a myth. They would build statues of the soldier king and write songs about the princess who saw the truth. But Alara didn't care about the legends. She remembered the way he'd looked at her in the wreckage, not as a pawn, and not as a royal, but as the only person who had stayed when the world ended. He had been a man of scars long before the war started. Now, he was a man who had finally found a reason to stop running from them. And as she sat by his med pod in the quiet hours of the station's artificial night, Alara realized the plain soldier had never been plain at all. He had simply been waiting for a world that was broken enough to finally need him. "Would you like me to generate a cinematic image of Jax and Alara in the wreckage of the hive core?"